Welcome to Opportunity Zone Pitch Day's afternoon panel discussion, the 2025 tax cuts. We're going to be talking about OZ 2.0, and if we have time, maybe we'll discuss some other key provisions in the proposed tax legislation that's making its way through the Senate right now. And just a quick introduction for both of these gentlemen. Blake Christian is a tax partner and CPA at HCVT, and Jim Lang is a corporate and tax attorney at Greenberg Traurig. They're both very prominent, active participants in the Opportunity Zone space, both frequent speakers at Opportunity Zone events all around the country, and they're both members of my OZ Insiders Mastermind group. I'm going to give a little lay of the land in terms of what is happening right now with Opportunity Zones. There's a lot of people in the room right now are very familiar with Opportunity Zones. They've been doing this for years. They've been investing for years, or they've been practicing in the space for years, or they've been developing for years. There's also a lot of folks here who are new. There's folks who may have just learned about Opportunity Zones yesterday or last week or a couple months ago, and this is their first event or maybe their second event. And they a lot of people are constantly learning about Opportunity Zones. It's one of those things that we cannot create enough educational content about. We have to continue to do so. So this might be review for some of you, but I just want to kind of go through where we are right now. The current round of Opportunity Zones is a perishable tax incentive. It was always designed to be perishable and to expire effectively, close off to any gains generated beyond the end of 2026. So what Congress is working on right now is saving Opportunity Zones and renewing them and giving us a new round of Opportunity Zone designations and allowing the program to have new life beyond that current sunset date of December 31, 2026. Now, just earlier this week, this is very timely that we're all here. I promise I didn't plan for OZ Pitch Day to be to hit during the week that the Senate Finance Committee released their draft, but that is exactly what has happened. Just on Monday of this week, the Senate Finance Committee released new draft tax legislation text that would make Opportunity Zones a permanent feature in the tax code, with new zones being designated every 10 years. So some topics for discussion. I want to save some time toward the end of our panel discussion today to briefly discuss some other key provisions in the tax bill. Some that are very important to a lot of the investors on the call, I'm sure, are 100% bonus depreciation, SALT cap relief, the QBI deduction, new estate tax thresholds. But first, let's talk OZs 2.0, since this is OZ Pitch Day. And by the way, I do want this to be interactive also. So if anybody out there listening, watching, has any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A tool in your Zoom app, use the chat in your Zoom app. We'll try to get to as many of those questions as we can. But Blake, I'll turn to you. I'm not sure if Jim is on audio yet or not. Hopefully he can get that sorted out in a moment. What are the key OZ-related items that the current Senate bill that just dropped on Monday would accomplish if it gets enacted? Maybe you can walk us through a lot of those.
Sure. So it parallels the House bill that passed a few weeks ago, pretty lockstep in a lot of areas. So as you talked about, this is going to be an Oz program, but it's a whole new program. It's they're going to terminate Oz 1.0 that we're living under right now, effective 12/31/2026. Obviously, those will still, people be able to finish up their projects and things and hold and sell those. But this new program will be effective January 1, 2027. There will be new Oz census tracts designated. And most interestingly to me is that at least 1/3 of those census tracts are going to be in rural areas. And in some cases, it could be more than 1/3 in some states. And if you invest in in a rural area, and you have 90% of your assets devoted to rural, then you'll get a 30% basis bump after a 5-year hold. And you will also only have to improve your real estate, or if it was operating assets in an operating business, you only have to increase your cost basis by 50% rather than the standard 100%. under Oz 1.0. You will still continue to do that in non-rural areas. So, again, one of the more interesting things in the Senate bill versus the House bill is rather than having a cliff 5-year period that the basis adjustment kicks in, it stair steps it. So the first 3 years, you get a 1% basis bump. And so after holding it for 3 years, you'd have 3%. Then in years 4 and 5, you get an extra 2% bump. And then in year 6, you get a 3% bump. So cumulatively, you get a 10% basis bump after a 6-year hold under the Senate bill. We'll see where this settles. And then also hopefully Jim, are you
Can you
active?
hear?
Oh, great.
We got you. We got Jim. Yes.
We want Jim on
Great.
here too. And then, kind of as a catch-all, which they've been talking about, since the beginning and even before the original enactment of the Oz program, we're going to have a lot more informational reporting, which I personally applaud, because in this renewal period, it would be nice to have a little more statistics than we have about the effectiveness of the program. But there will be a lot more disclosure as far as, who the investors are, how many employees do you have, what census tracts are you in, et cetera. And this will allow Treasury to do periodic reporting. I can't remember if it's every 5 years or 10 years, but they'll be doing periodic reporting talking about the effectiveness of the program, which is going to play off of this data that they're going to collect, which some people view as a little bit of a nuisance, but I think it's important for effectiveness. So I'll stop there and let Jim weigh in a little bit.
Yeah, good stuff. And Jim, good to have you here. Pick up where Blake left off if he missed any points there. Wants you to share a little bit.
I was saying all the bad things about you all while I was on mute. So now I can say the good things. But sorry about that, and thank you for having me. No, this was very exciting this week to get this language. I know it's still a work in progress, and the Senate obviously has not voted on it. Might vote on it next week, but seeing the Senate finance language was a great start here. A few points that I would like to bring up is that the most important incentive for most investors in a qualified opportunity zone is the 10-year benefit. And that 10-year benefit under the Senate language is becoming permanent. That's incredibly important. That's great work that the Senate has done. We were excited to see House language obviously being included in the House bill was very important. The Senate has improved upon that, given us permanency to the incentive on a forever basis in the code. So we're all highly appreciative and very excited. Our clients are very excited about that. Also, very favorably, we had a move forward of the QOZ designations to next year, to 2026 instead of 2027, which eliminates any period of time where there are no qualified opportunity zones. And there was also a fix to push us back to December 31 of 2028 for the current zone designations. So essentially in line with the law as it is today. There probably has to be some regulatory transition rule fixes for current zones, but these are very important provisions that I think were added and fixes to the current legislation on a go-forward basis. We'll have some period of time where we'll have two sets of zones, new zones and old zones under this language. I would like to highlight, before we move on to any other provisions, I would like to highlight that I do think the industry's greatest concern right now with both the House and the Senate language is effective date language for the new incentive for the QOZ 2.0. So as excited as we are about permanency, we still have a January 1, 2027 effective date. That impacts investors and fund managers in a major way, and that we're almost looking at 18 months to 2 years of a period of time where investors are going to be disincentivized to invest in the incentive, and rational investors might probably should wait until January of Q1 of 2027. That means funds may not be offered next year or this year for the remainder of the year, and we have a quote unquote dead period in investing. the Senate knows about this. I know the Senate is thinking about this, talking about this. Everybody in the industry that is talking with the Senate or the House right now are talking to them about this very issue. But I think that's at the top of list of things that we didn't get in the Senate language, and that I think the industry desperately needs.
Yeah, great points from both of you. I'm going to share my screen here for a minute. This was a presentation I gave at the very top of the event. I had to kind of breeze through the legislative updates though. But here's mainly the key bullet points just to review. I think we've already touched on most, if not all of these. Actually, I don't think we touched on this yet. There was a lot of discussion a few years back about possibly extending this current program and moving the deferral date back for existing investors. The deferral date currently is December 31, 2026. There was some thought given to bumping that back to December 31, 2028. That seems to no longer have any support in the Congress. Congress right now, the Senate in particular, is really prioritizing making opportunity zones permanent. So that's the second bullet point here. The current version of the Senate bill that came out of Senate Finance Committee on Monday, which by the way is not final and has not gone to the floor for a vote yet, still has a lot of hurdles it needs to clear. It would make opportunity zones permanent with 10-year cycles. The program would start January 1, 2027, as previously mentioned. We talked about reporting requirements. I don't think we've talked about census tract eligibility criteria. One key thing that the current Senate bill does that echoes what the House bill had in it from last month is it redefines what a low-income tract is. And as a result, there are going to be fewer areas around the country that can qualify as opportunity zones. And by my calculation, it's going to result in a roughly 22% fewer opportunity zones moving forward. There will still be great areas all around the country where you can invest and receive these OZ benefits. Eric Hayden in his previous presentation mentioned that one or two of the zones in downtown San Jose will still be available. I ran some tests for Capitol Square, our first presenter, about where they're developing in Richmond, Virginia. They're right on the edge, but that area may or may not also be available. So we're keeping an eye on that. That's still in flux as well. The new basis step-up schedule. Go ahead, Jim.
I would just say that that's very high on the list.
Yes.
I mean, the first thing I talked about is I think the number one priority among everybody in the industry and getting fixed is the effective date, but very high on the list is getting zones back up to roughly our 8,700 number or the current criteria, because a 22 to 23% reduction in zones is significant. Now, what the Senate did that the House did not, they did not trail the House in having a rule set aside. So that would mean that there potentially could be more urban tracts under the Senate language than there certainly would be under the House language.
Correct. Yeah, Blake mentioned the 30%, or was it 1/3, OZs need to be designated rural. That is only in the House version. The current Senate version of the bill does not have that in it, just to clarify there. Thanks, Jim, for pointing that out. One other key thing that's not included on my list of bullet points here is that there was a special rule for Puerto Rico, a carve-out, where they were able to designate all of their low-income tracts as opportunity zones. And the Senate bill explicitly removes that language from an OZ 2.0 designation process. So Puerto Rico would be treated just like any other state. And we talked a little bit about the additional incentives for rural OZ investments. Here's a little timeline that I put together of how I think this may unfold. We are here right in the middle between beginning of 2025 and beginning of 2026. I'm anticipating the One Big Beautiful Bill Act will pass at some point in the next few weeks or a couple of months. And that's when the process will really begin in earnest. We're looking at an OZ designation period for round 2 of designations beginning July 1 of 2026 and should wrap up by October of 2026 unless Treasury extends some deadlines, but certainly by Q4 of 2026, we'll have those zones finalized and the map will take effect on January 1, 2027. This is really when the new program would begin. The basis step-ups start to expire at the end of 27, but even if you don't get in prior to the end of 27, if you get in 29 or 30 or 31 or 32 and beyond, you'll still get some incremental basis step-up. It's not a sharp cliff like an OZ 1.0. And I expect we'll probably get some new IRS regulatory language at some point within the first couple years of the program. Gentlemen, any thoughts on timing here? Am I missing anything, or what are some other key things that you want to highlight in this bill that just came out of the Senate?
Well, based on your timeline, I would just highlight that post 2034, we then start a new 10-year deferral period. So I think that this is a little bit choppy, and this is a legislative process, so it has to be. I think that a lot of the folks that work on this would love to see rolling deferral periods, and we don't have that cliff in December 31 of 2033. I think for scoring purposes that we might be faced with that right now with what we're going to get passed. I never want to say with certainty, but there's battles that can still be fought, and that might not be one that can still be fought in this round. But
And in,
what
in
that
layman, sorry, in layman's terms, when we use the term scoring, we mean how much does this all cost? Because at the end of the day, that is a huge component in passing tax legislation, in tax cuts and spending, is how much is this all going to cost? And I think, if you pick up a newspaper any point in time in the next few weeks, there'll be discussion about how much this is all costing, how much it's adding to the debt. So that's what we mean when we use the term scoring, in that sense. Go on, Jim.
And this is just a little $5 billion corner of a massive bill.
Right.
But to elaborate on timing, that does mean we'll be facing another cliff again, 2031, 32, 33, and then we'll be starting a brand new incentive, essentially same incentive, but with a 10-year deferral period. Then going forward till 2043. And so we're going to have this choppiness in terms of fundraising under the current language, but that's, I think, something we have to live with, at least in the short term, until we can get further legislation.
Yeah, Blake, any points for you to add regarding OZ 2.0 provisions or the timeline, or any insights that you have?
Well, I mean, the whole point of this kind of dead period that we're in right now, where, from my perspective, if a client, generates a capital gain, I'm still telling them they'd be silly not to invest in Oz 1.0, even though it's a short deferral period, it's still valuable. And so, a lot of my clients are still doing that. What I would love to, I'm very disappointed that they didn't push out, because there was legislation to push out the recognition date till December of 2028. I think a decent compromise would be to say, hey, look, if you put in money now, maybe you get a 2-year deferral. It kind of back to your rolling concept. Just encourage people to keep putting money in now, because we could very well have, and we've seen many projects, they end up having some investment problems. They can't complete the project, and I think you're going to have a fair amount of that happening because of this mismatch in the effective dates. So
Yeah, go ahead, Jim.
We have clients, and we represent some of the bigger fund QOF fund managers in the country. We have clients that very well, in fact, will not offer their new fund until Q1 of 2027 under the current Senate language. What that's going to mean is the big funds can probably handle that. They've got the capital to keep their infrastructure together for 18 to 24 months. Some smaller funds might not have that, and they might not survive 18 to 24 months without capital raise. And then for an investor, you're going to have much more limited options in the next year and a half under this language, because there won't be the funds on the market to go invest in until Q1 of 2027. So it's creating problems across the board that it's a relatively easy fix. And even if we've proposed legislation now in the last 2 days that if it's a scoring problem, let's move up to effective date of the legislation. And for those dates, let's go out to December 31 of 2031 for investors in 2025 from the effective date forward. For 2026, go forward to December 31 of 2032, and then keep it for 2033 for everybody else thereafter. And that should alleviate much of that problem. But having this effective on January 1 of 2027 is problematic for our whole industry. And it's clearly number one on my list, and I don't want to keep harping on it. The last thing I will say is we've talked about the reporting requirements. Those become effective immediately at enactment of the legislation under current language, we could be looking at dismal numbers over the first 2 years for investment on our first reporting numbers, which isn't good for anybody in this industry to show low investment numbers in the first 2 years. And that's going into midterms. So that's politically important too, that we would be showing very low QOZ 2.0 investment or end of QOZ 1.0 investment numbers. So I think it's an incredibly important point. So anybody that is having conversations with Washington, D.C., I think I would put that on top of your list right now.
Yeah, that's a really important nuance there. And Jim, I know several of our colleagues have been in touch with members of the Senate and their staff over the last few days here, pushing for a lot of these changes. Yeah, really interesting that there's going to be this disincentive for a lot of funds to capital raise next year. Investors might find it difficult to find places to invest. I will say, though, that I think I agree with you to a large point, Jim, but I think there will be enough smaller funds who need to raise capital in the next couple of years that they'll continue to offer. And I think if you're an investor and you're able to control when you trigger your capital gains and you're getting into 2026, sure, maybe you bump those out. Maybe you can control when you trigger them. Maybe you want to trigger them in 27 instead. But if you're an investor or a taxpayer and maybe you're a minority holder in a business that sells, or you're rebalancing your stock portfolio and you don't have a lot of control over when you trigger your gains, and lo and behold, you land on a 6 or 7 or 8 figure gain, you don't have a choice. You have to put that to work in an OZ fund now if you want to do an opportunity zone investment. The other benefit to doing it now is, one, with certainty what the program looks like. It's not in flux. It's written into the statute. This is it. And two, it starts your 10-year clock a little bit sooner. So just wanted to share that time. Go ahead, Jim.
Wait. I agree with much of what you said. Many investors, if you're going to sell an asset, you might not be tax planning for 2027, and you're going to have your gain when you have your gain, and you're going to need a QOZ to put that in, particularly now until any law is passed. I think that's certainly true. That's probably true for the rest of 2025. But in your example, if you have a K1 gain in 2026, there aren't many tax advisors that would tell you to make that investment in 2026 under the current language. They would say wait on your K1 gain until one of your 180-day clocks in 2027 to make your investment. So I certainly echo you in 2025. I think 2026, it might be a K1 investors that are getting their gains off of those K1s that you mentioned, I think very likely would wait till 27.
That's a very good point, because they have a little bit of flexibility as to when they can start their 180-day clock. Let's talk about
Jimmy, if I could just interject, I'm sorry, but from a planning perspective, and that's a great point you just made, Jim. But we should be talking to our clients if they have an appreciated asset and they're holding it individually, move that to a partnership, which can generally be done tax-free, and then that way, if they do sell in 2026, as you were just pointing out, you can push that gain into 2027. Whereas if they sold it and they individually held that asset, they may not, the timeline probably isn't going to flip into 2027. So there's definitely a lot of planning people can be doing now to get into Oz 2.0 with some advanced planning.
Yeah, great insights from both of you. Fingers crossed that an amended Senate bill puts in some of these transition rules that we're advocating for. It'd be great if the effective date started at date of enactment as opposed to January 1, 2027. That's a really easy fix. A few other popular OZ 2.0 ideas that the industry has been advocating for several years that are not yet included in the current Senate bill. I've got a list of them up on the screen here. This is not an exhaustive list, but I'll just rattle off a few of them and then turn to you. One, the industry would really like for non-capital gains dollars to be able to achieve at least some of the tax advantages of OZ investing. The Senate bill doesn't have any of that in there. There's also a provision in the current statute that does not allow for qualified opportunity funds to invest directly into other qualified opportunity funds. We'd like to see that changed to allow for a feeder fund concept. There's also a rule about interim gains if a property within a fund or within a qualified opportunity zone business is sold, that triggers a capital gain back up to the investor. And the industry feels as though if that gain gets reinvested in timely fashion back into another opportunity zone property, that should be allowed to continue to roll and not trigger that gain. The clock should continue to run, and it should continue the deferral process. There's currently no relief about that in the Senate bill. We also want to make it easier for pre-existing operating businesses to qualify based on how tangible property gets treated. It's very difficult for some pre-existing businesses to qualify, operating businesses to qualify. And then there was some thought about offering additional incentives for affordable housing, like what they're doing with rural. But gentlemen, turning to you now, anything important that I missed on this list here, or do you want to pick and choose a couple of these to talk about in more detail?
Yes, just on the non-gain capital gain dollars, you may have mentioned it, but the House bill did have a paltry $10,000 lifetime investment opportunity, and as we've discussed on some of the side calls, no fund is going to even take $10,000. It's just not worth their hassle to do the paperwork and due diligence on the investor. So we'd like to see that moved up to $100,000 and hopefully be added to the Senate version, because why should it be limited to just capital gains?
Yeah, good point there, Blake. Jim, any other comments from you about what's not in the bill that we'd like to see beyond the transition stuff, which we've talked about?
I've hammered on that enough, I think. But that's clearly number one on our clients list. But just looking at your list, I agree with everything on here. Interim gain, so the ability to roll over, is very important to our clients. That's one that they would love to see. And also the affordable housing and even stretching into workforce housing incentives, particularly reducing the substantial improvement test for either turning market rate into affordable/workforce or keeping affordable/workforce as affordable workforce. So say projects rolling off their low-income housing tax credit 15 years or whenever they are rolling off, and reducing that substantial improvement requirement so you can easily roll those into QOZ investments. I think those are two that our clients really hammer on. Of course, we all, as structuring, as lawyers, we would love to see fund to funds. That's something that I think is a hole in the law right now that makes us do things that are not commercial because we have to fit into the legal box here. But I agree with all this. I do think that the House $10,000 isn't really workable. I don't think it really will have any practical effect. Like Blake said, nobody's going to raise a fund around $10,000 investors, and you might have some group that tries crowdfunding solutions, or several groups that try crowdfunding, but for the most part, $10,000 investment isn't going to go very far.
And one other point I would add here that I mentioned at the Yellow Brick Road conference is, and especially with funding drying up, I would love to see the Senate add an incentive for a debt component, which is not, addressed in the capital stack. And, again, a lot of these projects still need cash in there. So what I would love to see, which has been under some other programs like the Enterprise Zone program in California, is either have a full exemption on the interest earned on a loan to an opportunity zone project, or at a minimum a 50% haircut. And so it's like a synthetic tax exempt bond, without all the cost of doing a tax exempt bond issuance. And I think you would see banks and private groups step up to get that tax-free or that tax-free yield. So
But two things that aren't on this list that I think are just important in the future. And again, in a perfect world, we'd have all of these things. I think at this point, we're very late stage. And so we have to be careful about how much we're asking for when we go and we have these conversations with senators and their staff at this point in time. But two other things that we would love to see either now or in the future with standalone legislation is the ability for CDFIs to hold cash up at the qualified opportunity fund level beyond the investment period, the typical investment period. So say add 12 to 18 months. Like one gives fund managers much more flexibility to go deploy their capital, but two, it gives good working capital to these CDFIs who need cash and they're mission driven and where they can deploy it. So that would be an valuable one. And then hand in hand with that is making this work more, the whole incentive work more efficiently with historic tax credits, new markets tax credits, low income housing tax credits, and renewable energy, ITC.
For sure, for sure. Well, I did create a report. I just put the finishing touches on it last night. It's a quick 4-page guide to what is currently in the 2025 Opportunity Zone legislation. So you can download that report at opportunityzones.com/2025 legislation or scan that QR code on your screen. Wanted to get to a few questions about OZ 2.0, and then maybe we can touch briefly on some of the other key provisions that you see impacting your clients in the tax bill. Question from Reed Thomas, an old friend of ours. He says, great panel. Can you clarify the definition of what would qualify as a rural tract? And is it the same in both House and Senate bill? I think the language is the same in the House and Senate bill. The definition, frankly, isn't that great. It might be difficult to map, to kind of crosswalk what rural means from an area onto a census tract level, but I've got the text pulled up in front of me. I'll just read directly from it. The term rural area means any area other than a city or town that has a population of greater than 50,000 inhabitants and any urbanized area contiguous and adjacent to a city or town. So I don't know, any additional thoughts on that, or did I cover that? We can move on to the next question.
It's not going to be it's not strictly by census tract, and so it's going to be making these maps a little bit more difficult, and it's going to be more place-based. We do work with so there's there's probably more than two, but two that I work with at least pretty regularly, definitions of rural. One is from the new markets tax credits world, and that really is MSA driven. And the other, which is being adopted here apparently, is the Department of Agricultural definition of rural. So USDA definition of rural. And that's the one we're using here, is the closer definition is to theirs. But that can split census tracts up, and thankfully that's the broader definition. That's the one that actually will pull in more areas. And when you think rural, it's the one that will pull in the areas that you really are thinking about when rural. The new markets definition, based on the MSAs, an area that you know in your mind is a rural area, oftentimes is actually not a rural area for new markets tax credit purposes because it's pulled into an MSA that you would never think that it's really supposed to be pulled into.
Yeah, so the answer, Reed, is it's complicated and it hasn't been finalized yet, I don't think. But at the moment, it's a tract that's part of an area that's less than 50,000. Let's see. Another question here from Karen. It's kind of an interesting one. Will the Permian Basin be in OZ 2.0 zones? And if yes, would it be considered rural? Well, the Permian Basin is an enormous area of Western Texas and a little bit of New Mexico too, I believe. So I would imagine that there will be several parts of the Permian Basin that will be located in OZ 2.0 zones, just like a lot of the Permian Basin is currently in OZ 1.0 zones. Would it be considered rural? I think it depends on each individual tract. I'm guessing a lot of them would be, but some of them might fall into an MSA that you might not think it should, to Jim's point. So I don't know any other thoughts from you two guys on that, or otherwise we can move on to the next question.
I mean, the areas that are adjacent to the bigger towns probably will not be rural. And I don't know enough about the basin probably that I should, but for example, if Midland is in the basin, I don't think Midland's going to be rural, but areas around Midland will be rural.
Yeah, you drive another 20 minutes west of Midland, you might be in a rural area there. Let's see, question here from Brad, and this one addresses Jim. He says, Jim, curious why you think allowing the existing zones under initial program to have a 12/31/28 expiration when the original OZ program limits new investments to 12/31/26. So why should we care about the extra 2 years? No new investment, but the sites will continue until the end of 2047 for those sites that qualified and spent around 150 grand in costs. Thoughts? So a lot to unpack there.
Well, I don't think that that's necessarily clear. So the House legislation moved us up to December 31 of 2026. The Senate now has pushed us back under existing law to December 31 of 2028.
Which is what it's been since the
That's right.
original TCJA of 2017.
That's right.
Yeah, go on.
Now, we've always pushed for transition rules, which can be regulatory. These do not need to be in the law itself, but we've asked for transition rules even for the late stages, because arguably, if you haven't placed your service, your tangible property into service by the end of your working capital safe harbor period, and that's after December, in this law, December 31, 2028 or December 31, 2026, then we could have a tangible property issue being placed into service in an opportunity zone. Now, there were good transition rules in some proposed legislation a few years ago that would have allowed for a minimum investment to be qualified. But we don't have those right now, and we don't have that in this legislation. And so I think that even with the 2028 date, we've got a cliff that we have to worry about, and hopefully we can have transition rules regulatory that will fix that. I mean, we would love that in this bill, but again, we can only ask for so much. But that's my brief take on it, is that there is a cliff coming up to current zones, and the more time that these zones are recognized, the longer you have to get tangible property into service and in a trade or business.
And just to further clarify, and correct me if I'm wrong, Blake and Jim, but Brad's asking, he just submitted another question, why do you need the 2 more years? I think the new investment is an investor capitalizing a qualified opportunity fund by the sunset date of this current 1.0 program, but then the fund itself needs to deploy capital, and they just have an additional 2 years to deploy that capital into the zones, right?
Well, right, and I want to clarify. There's two and under the House legislation, the whole industry was up in arms again about effective dates and the zone designation, and with the zones ending on December 31st of 2026. They also were up in arms about what we've talked about a lot on this call, that January 1st, 2027 beginning of the new incentive. There's 2 different issues, and I think everybody here probably understands it, but just to clarify, one, on the zone designation, keeping the old zones alive for 2 more years is very important because of what I just talked about in terms of deployment of capital, keeping working capital safe harbor plans alive until December 31 of 2028, and then hopefully having transition rules where even if you're still in development after that point in time, that we're going to be okay because of a minimum spend, let's say in that QOZB, that we can adopt into transition. The other issue, and the very big issue that I was pointing out at the beginning of this call, is a fundraising issue, that the incentive after January 1 of 2027 is a much better incentive under this language and under the House language than it is under the current law, because you get another 10% step up in basis, you get a much longer deferral period. So many investors will push off if they have the ability to push off, they will push off their investment until January 1 of 2027. And that's why moving that date forward is so critically important, is for fundraising and capital raise in this industry.
Perfect. Yeah, good clarification there. We're running low on time here. We got to move on to our next presenter in just a few minutes. I'm dropping contact information and LinkedIn profiles on my 2 presenters here in the chat momentarily here. Let's shift outside of OZ 2.0 now. I'm curious. I'll turn to Blake first. What are some of the other key provisions in this big tax bill that's part of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, or OB3, as some people are calling it, that your clients are very keen to get more insight on, or that will impact them the most, do you think? And I mentioned a few of them off the top of the show, but Blake, turn to you now.
Right. So bonus depreciation obviously is near and dear to the Oz world, since it's mainly driven by real estate projects. And so that is going to be effective, if it's passed with the current language in the Senate bill, it would be effective January 1st, 2024. I'm sorry, 2025. But I did actually, Jim, I did see something that had a January 19th effective date on it, but I'm not sure if that was on bonus or not. But anyway, early part of the year, even though the law may pass, mid-year, we're going to have bonus depreciation retroactive. And then 179 expensing, that is increasing from $1 million to $2.5 million. And so both of those are significant benefits to real estate projects as well as operating businesses, big infrastructure projects, that type of thing. Solar, all those. So it's those are all good. On the bad side, we're seeing a lot of the green credits go away, and we are seeing a lot of people twinning, different tax provisions for maximum benefit. So so that those provisions are a little bit unnerving to some people that are in the middle of projects.
Sure. Jim, any other key provisions in the OB3 that your clients are keen to get their hands on?
I'd say, since I'm also a tax credit lawyer, in the community development world, it's very exciting to have new markets tax credits proposed as a permanent incentive under the code. It's always been on an extension basis since its inception in 2000, and so that's very important to that industry. And that industry is almost a kissing cousin to the QOZ industry, and so that's very important for that industry. And then the low income housing tax credit enhancements, the permanency of some of these enhancements, and the ability to the bond financing from 50% to 25% is very important to get affordable housing projects done under that incentive, under the LIHTC incentive. And so I think those are very important for the community development world.
Good. Let's see. Got a few more minutes here. I did post additional information on Blake and Jim in the chat. If you want to follow up with them on LinkedIn, I also posted their email addresses. Feel free to reach out. They're both friendly. They don't bite. They're members of my OZ Insiders mastermind community, which I'll be talking a little bit more about toward the end of the event today in a couple more hours. Let's see if we can get a couple more questions here. I did just answer this in the Q&A. This came in from Greg, and I just wanted to speak it aloud so everybody's aware of it. He asks, investing before the cliff date now or next year would still qualify for the 100% capital gain after 10 years. The 100%, the step up to fair market value, I guess, is what he means, and the elimination of capital gain after 10 years. And I say, yes, that is correct. So that 10-year benefit is still available in this 1.0 program through the end of next year. And then that's the main thing that the Senate is working on making permanent beyond 2026 as well. So still a lot of good reasons to make an OZ investment today if you need to. Greg, any additional thoughts there?
Yeah, my only other thought is that's what I led off with is the permanency of this incentive and the post 10-year benefit. The Senate has done an amazing effort in doing that. So I've been very doom and gloom on that effective date, but we're incredibly excited in the industry to get that permanency, and that the 10-year incentive, which is the most important incentive for 98% of investors, is going to go out now forever under the Senate language. So that's important to highlight. We didn't talk about this, but it's important to high net worths and family offices that plan on holding essentially forever, and they like to hold assets forever, as we do now have a 30-year fair market value step up, so that you're not forced to sell the asset like we were under the current law at December 31 of 2047. Now you can hold the asset forever, and you're going to get stepped up to the fair market value after a 30-year hold.
Yeah, that was a key change that we didn't cover earlier. So thanks for pointing that out. Let's see, we got one more minute, and I got a question in here from Matthew that I wanted to address very briefly. We can go down a very deep rabbit hole on this question, but we don't have time for that today. So he says, the Senate's changes state that OZ 2.0's first period is for 7 years through 2033, and thereafter it will be 10-year rolling deferral periods. It's interesting, actually, because there's actually a disalignment between when the zones get designated and when the gain recognition date is. The gain recognition date is on 20X3, so 2033, 2043, 2053. The applicable start date, or the new zone map, kicks into effect on 20X7, so 2027, 2037, 2047, and so on. So you've got this weird period of time for 2 or 3 years in every 10-year cycle, where what if you make an investment in 2035? The new map's not ready yet, and the future gain recognition date would actually be 2043. Do you get an 8-year deferral? But what map do you use? It's a little bit up in the air still. I don't know if you guys had quick thoughts on that because we're out of time, but
My,
wanted to touch on that briefly.
my quickest thought on that, I'll let Blake answer, is that that's why that transition rule and regulations would be so important here, both for the current maps, but every 10 years, we're going to have new transition of maps. And so we have to make sure that your QOZB and what you're doing in the current map is blessed going forward, and that we don't have map issues for current deployments.
Blake, last word from you, and then we'll sign off for this
I
session.
think we're going to have to fix that because it's going to create some chaos.
Yeah, good points there. Well, gentlemen, Jim Lang from Greenberg Trowey, great to see you, and Blake Christian from HCVT, great to see you. We'll be in touch.
You've just got a few more days to reach out to your senators, and so if I would suggest doing it, particularly if you have a Republican senator.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much.
Thank you both.